Hi, welcome to HowtoDandD. My name is Fred Wheeler and today I want to talk about Dungeons & Dragons. Usually my focus is Dungeons & Dragons 5e, but I will be talking sort of about Dungeons & Dragons in general, and the topic for today is chaotic neutral. No, it's not. I'm not going to talk about The Shining. The topic for today is Dungeon Masters not using alignment is lazy. Now that's quite a provocative title, I am aware of that. I'm going to make it clear to everybody who is sort of maybe unsure of what my message is, that this video is just my opinion. You can take it, you can leave it, you can add to it, you can change it. I really don't care. All I want to do is talk about my view of alignment and explain my statement. Personally, I don't think that Dungeon Masters using alignment is actually lazy in a bad way. I actually think it makes good sense. Now, I'm not going to dispute that not using alignment is lazy, because understanding the alignment system is very involved and confusing, and there's a lot to it, and I will explain why I think that's the case. But first of all, I just want to say I think it makes good sense not to use alignment in Dungeons & Dragons 5e in particular. I also think that, yes, it is a lazy form of dungeon mastering, and that's what I'm all about with these videos. Now here's a few reasons to stop using alignment, and there's a reason why I've decided to select a donkey's ass, because I really feel like that alignment has become a donkey's ass. Played Dungeons & Dragons long enough to know that there's a whole bunch of reasons why we should have just dumped it a long time ago and not waited for designers in Dungeons & Dragons 5e to decide to sort of make it no longer relevant. So first, people arguing about alignment with usually no constructive results whatsoever that I've ever seen. In fact, I've seen it drive a huge wedge between dungeon masters and other players, and a wedge between one player and another player. And these conversations can go on for 10 minutes, 20 minutes, half an hour, or hours, eating into the really important aspect of the game, which is playing Dungeons & Dragons. And I know a lot of people will say that the nerd discussions about alignment are all part of Dungeons & Dragons. Bollocks. Bollocks to that. Number two, alignment, as far as I can tell, and as far as I can tell in terms of its intention, alignment describes a character's past and present moral and personal attitudes with regard to their typical behaviour in the world. Now that's what's actually spelled out in the Player's Handbook for Dungeons & Dragons 5e. That might not be necessarily exactly what's spelled out in older versions of the game, but what does that mean? Well, it essentially means that whatever past actions and possibly present actions, because remember the present can change because it's happening right now, these are typical behaviours. That means they don't always act this way. Not every action they make is always going to follow this particular alignment. And I would like to point out that Joe Manganiello has a character who does exactly this. And frankly, Dungeons & Dragons 5e has a much better system in place now, which is the traits, personality traits, bonds, flaws, and ideals. I feel like that actually indicates what a character's like a lot more than something like alignment, where variation can be quite wide as far as I can tell. Number three, the Player's Handbook doesn't say that it determines character actions. Nowhere can I see in the Player's Handbook does it say that it determines a character's actions. That seems to have been assumed. So why do so many people think that it does? I think the fault is certainly on the paladin. And not like, it's always the paladin's fault, but because in the past, the paladin was very much alignment driven. How you could portray your paladin was basically lawful good, and that was it. or we could say lawful stupid, as some people would put it, but it's lawful good. And so that was very much part of it. But I have seen alignment used in really bad ways by players and dungeon masters, and it's essentially being used as a misunderstood straitjacket for a player. Now, there might be a good reason for doing that, but there's a better way to do that. It's almost as if somebody's decided to drop Dungeons and Dragons into the Matrix, and every character in there has got a code and must perform and act a particular way, and they can never change that. This code determines everything. And as we know, things can change. And in Dungeons and Dragons, there's a point to having things change. We have story development, but we have another thing called, it's called character development, right? Character development. That means that characters actually do things that help them develop. So number 4 is alignment can be in flux during a campaign. That means that characters change. As I said, it's called character development. If you've watched Star Wars, we know that Han Solo starts off essentially what seems to be chaotic neutral. But whatever you might view him in terms of alignment, it really doesn't matter because his character changes. Whether it's because of what he wanted or because Princess Leia brings out the best of him or his interactions with Luke Skywalker, who cares? Han Solo is not the same character at the end of Return of the Jedi as he was in A New Hope. So, character development. Now, Star Wars is not Dungeons and Dragons. I'm totally aware of that. It is a predetermined story, but it's just to illustrate the idea that characters can actually change in Dungeons and Dragons. Number 5. Dungeon masters can still decide what is an evil action for a character to keep that sort of thing out of their game if they want to. There's no requirement that you must use alignment to stop your game falling into an evil sort of slogfest full of murder hobos who have no other intention of doing anything other than kill the storemen or people, take out all the chickens, do all sorts of horrific things, and appeal to all of the dark fantasies that they have in their mind, which they could probably engage in a much better location, such as a video game, where they're not hopefully playing with some other person who has to deal with all of their dark desires. And I would like to also point out that number 6 is there are no more character option alignment restrictions in Dungeons & Dragons 5e. Nowhere is there an alignment restriction in terms of how you can play a particular character option, whether that be essentially a race, a class, feats. It doesn't apply. Now, there are some alignment-driven magic items, but they aren't quite the same as the alignment-driven magic items we've seen in the past. And I think they really, in terms of the numbers, I think there's maybe 1 or 2. In fact, I might be incorrect about that because I'm pretty sure I had to create one. It was a helmet, if I remember right. So really, alignment isn't sort of driven that way in terms of the mechanics. Number 7. Alignment doesn't stop players performing an evil action with their character. If you thought that, you would say, okay, you can have any alignment you like except the lawful evil, chaotic evil, or the neutral evil. You can do any other alignment other than those 3, because essentially you're trying to keep your campaign from devolving into an evil campaign, right? Alignment doesn't stop players trying to do that sort of stuff. So why even bother if they're never going to follow that anyway? Really, you're going to be breaking it down based on actions as it is, right? Or recurring actions or regular actions they take on. So number 8, really does alignment on a character sheet, again, reflect how players run their characters. Essentially what I just said before, but whether they select an alignment, whether they write it on their character sheet, essentially the go-to is when you want to do whatever you want to do, if players are going to do that, chaotic, neutral, anyone, let's go pick up that and we can just do whatever we like. It's not actually supposed to be the case, but that's often how a player will view it. That's how they get it past the Dungeon Master who's putting restrictions on alignment. Okay, so let's start looking at some real options for you as a Dungeon Master. If you're not going to use alignment, what are you going to do? Well, make it simple. Number 9. If a Dungeon Master or a player wants to avoid an evil campaign, that can be done without using alignment. Just say characters can't perform evil actions. Now, I feel like this is a bit extreme because I feel like there should be some sort of ability to have an action that is evil, simply because I like placing moral dilemmas in front of my players where it doesn't matter what they do, they may find themselves in a situation where they have to perform an evil action. They just have to decide which one they can tolerate. Now, that's a setup by a Dungeon Master, and certainly I agree that that's a setup that I would perform, and yes, I have done it many times before, and I would like to point out it goes right back to Keep on the Borderlands when Gary Gygax had a whole lot of goblin children in the Caves of Chaos, where players had to decide, once they had dealt with the goblin parents, what would they do with the goblin children? Do you leave them so they grow up with vengeance on their mind to wreak havoc on you and other people and cause ill will? Or do you put them to the sword so that that never happens? Essentially a moral dilemma, and I think it's actually a really good idea to have moral dilemmas in your campaign. But Dungeon Masters can determine what an action is that's evil. Now, I believe that Luke Hart over at the DM Lair, that YouTube channel, actually talked about this particular option. This is not what I use in my games. I broke it right down to the very bare bones of what I wanted out of my game so I didn't have to deal with hassle and make my life easier. And that is, last option, number 10. It is much easier to say you can't perform actions that will annoy another player, and I include the Dungeon Master. I am actually not that difficult in terms of what I will allow at my table. I am open to the idea that characters will perform good actions and evil actions. Okay, I have no real issue with that. What I don't want to do in my campaigns is have my players getting upset and angry and walking off because they don't like how somebody else is running their character. So I don't think that every character's action must be good. I just don't want their typical behavior at the table for that character to be evil. And I want them to take into consideration how the other players feel about the actions their characters are taking. That is really essentially the only thing I've ever worried about, and it's worked out pretty well for me, I've found so far. Now, if you've been scouring YouTube looking for alignment, I'm hoping that you've already seen Matthew Colville's video on alignment. He also gives you some examples, but the very first video that he did called Alignment is certainly worth your time. If you're looking to sort of expand your skills and repertoire with regard to being a lazy Dungeon Master, then Sly Flourish has a book called Return of the Lazy Dungeon Master. It's got lots of really good advice in it. Yes, there will be a link down in the description, which you're welcome to go and check out. If you found all of this useful, I have actually a number of videos on how to be a lazy Dungeon Master. There's a play series called basically The Lazy Dungeon Master, and you're welcome to go and check those videos out if you want to. If you want to support the channel so I keep doing more videos like this, I have a Patreon page, I have affiliate links to the book depository and Amazon down in the description if you want to use those, and I have a merchandise shelf. Make sure to share, like and subscribe, hit the bell button to be notified when I go live and when I publish new videos, and hey, till next time, keep rolling those 20s.